Hello and welcome to episode 86 of my podcast all about knitting and crochet in my yarn shop here in Wiesbaden, Germany. I'm Kiko and today is March 1st, 2021. Today I'm finally wearing my Hitchhiker shawl by Martina Behm. I showed it as a finished object exactly a month ago and I completely forgot to wear it on the podcast, so that's what I'm doing today. I knitted out of Opal Schafpate sock yarn in DK weight. That was the first time that Opal did the Schafpate collection in a DK weight. And Schafpate means it's it's wool from German sheep that live in Germany, and the yarn was completely produced in Germany. So yeah, I think it's a good thing. And it's good things if stuff doesn't have to travel around the world to get so that we can use it. So I think the more locally made stuff we can use, the better. So I'm really happy that Opal has this German yarn as well as other yarns. And so I was very interested in trying this yarn, and I really like the colors. It's an interesting mix of red, orange and pink, so I wasn't quite sure what to wear it with. I think it goes with my pink pullover as well, but I also like the combination of the shawl with this orange, so I thought that's what I'm going to do. I think most of you will know the Hitchhiker shawl. I think it's Martina Behm's most famous design, and I think it was the first of her designs that went viral, that everybody knitted. And it's the only pattern that's in both her originals book and her Hitchhiker collection book. Those are her latest books that she came out with. I like them both. I have them both. And but I had knitted a lot of Martina Behm designs before, but I'd never done the Hitchhiker before. So now I too have a Hitchhiker shawl. And the pullover I'm wearing is a design by Uni Yang or Zhang. I'm not quite sure how she pronounces her name. It's called Top Down Circular Yoke Master Template. And it's part of a craftsy class that I bought years ago. And I knit the pullover in January 2016, so it's a few years old. And I knit it within 9 days. So from the 20th to the 28th of January, I just knit this pullover. So I think back then maybe I probably did knit a lot of things at the same time, but right now I'm trying to knit on everything a little bit so I can keep showing them to you. And I think back then I would just pick something and I would knit on it, and then I'll pick the next thing and maybe have 3 or 4 on the side that I would knit on every now and then. But that's just how things change. So the pullover has a yoke, as the name implies, and you start with this big cable that you knit, I think, more or less by itself, and then somewhere the beginning and the ends are grafted together. Then you pick up stitches, knit to the top, and then you pick up stitches and knit down. At some point you split for the sleeves, fronts and back, and the upper bit on top of the cable has short rows, so you can see that bit is a lot higher than the bit on the front. And I held 2 yarns double. It's I think it's like a worsted weight sock yarn that we used to have in the shop where I used to work, and it's a mohair yarn. And both yarns they were very close in color. I think the mohair might have been a bit lighter, but by knitting them together, they sort of became this one new color. So it doesn't really look like I held 2 yarns together. And I really like the pullover. It's a bit short and it's fairly fitted. It's not quite... I keep saying I like baggy jumpers and oversized pullovers, and then I always knit them too tight, and not too tight, but quite tight. So but I still wear them. I still like them, and someday I'll have an oversized pullover at some point. We'll see. So that's what I am wearing. Then on to finished objects. And before I show you last week's finished object, I'll just show last week's finished object, and that was the cat socks. And I was supposed to give them to my nephew for his birthday, but with coronavirus restrictions and stuff, I wasn't able to give them to him yet, so I still have them here, and I can show you the second face that I stitched on. So I just thought, as I haven't given them to him yet, I might as well show them to you. Okay, and then the thing that my finished object that I finished last week for today. It's difficult today with words, but that's my virus shawl, and I hadn't really expected to finish it, but last week I had only crocheted 3 rows of the pattern repeat that I was working on, and then last week Monday, after I recorded, I did this 4th row, and then I decided, well, maybe it's time to weigh the remaining yarn that I have before I start the next pattern repeat and afterwards, so I know how much yarn I used. And that was a really good idea, because before I started the last pattern repeat, I had 45 grams of yarn, which is like almost a fourth of the yarn cake that I had. But when I finished the 4 rows, I only had 20 grams left. So that means I needed 25 grams to do the 1 pattern repeat, and I couldn't have done another one. So I was quite glad that I checked on that. But with the 20 grams I had left, I felt it's quite a lot to not use a little more. And that's why I added 1 more row of crochet that's not in the pattern. So the pattern just ends with the usual row of, maybe I'll show you here. So normally the pattern repeat would end on a double crochet and a chain. And it's like a straight edge, but then I added what looks like little picots, but I didn't really crochet picots. All I crocheted was a single crochet, 3 chains, and another single crochet in that same spot. And I only did that for 7 of the 9 spaces I had. And then the first and last space of every motif, I would just put in 1 single crochet. And that single crochet and double crochet, as in American terms, I think, and the British would say, I did the double crochet and 3 chains here, and I mixed that up. So with it's so weird that American and British crochet terms are different. So that always confuses me. So I think, the last row of the pattern, that's a treble and a chain stitch in British. And then what I did is the double crochet and the 3 chains and another double crochet. It's really complicated. I hope you know what I mean. If you crochet the shawl, just come up with your own little pattern for the edge. I washed it, I blocked it, and it has a really nice size. It's quite big, and can't wait for the weather to become warmer so that I can actually wear this, my virus shawl. So that's my 1 finished object for today. On to works in progress. I continued knitting on the socks I have on my needles. That's several socks. So I'll show you this one first. This is by a German designer called Häkel Virus, and she published the pattern last Saturday. So it's available now, and she's wrote that it's available in German and in English. So if you're interested, the German name is ein bisschen strukturiert. I think she translated it a bit structured. And I continued knitting on the second sock. Didn't do too much, but enough so that you can see that the colors are in different places. So that would have been the if I wanted two socks that look the same, I should have tried and started that spot in the color, but I never do that. I never try to match my socks, so these are different like this. I'm still on the leg, just a little more to do. Yeah, but they are published. I have already linked my project page to the pattern so that you can easily find it. And I'm knitting with the subscription yarn by Opal. Then I continued knitting on the second of my warm-up socks for the Sockmadness, which, by the way, starts today, but I haven't received an email yet. So I don't actually know how it's going to start and when it's going to start. I'm quite excited about that. But this is the warm-up pattern that I knit. This was the second warm-up pattern for this year's Sockmadness. Cochineal is the name. And I think I told you that I made a mistake in the rib pattern because I didn't read the errata, and I did the second sock the way it was supposed to be. I think it looks really nice. And I also used the second chart for the pattern. So these are supposed to be different for the two socks. So one pattern goes like this and the other goes like that. It's basically the same pattern, just in the other direction. I like the fact that they're different, especially as the cuffs are already different too. So yeah, I'll have to see how far I get with finishing these once the real madness starts, and I'll have to knit those socks. But if I'm not mistaken, the qualifying round is, or we have 2 weeks time to finish the socks to qualify. So that would mean that it's not too mad yet. I think one pair of socks in 2 weeks is manageable, and I can try and knit a bit on the old socks as well. So that's the Sockmadness. And then I picked up the longitudinal socks again. I knit the first one, which is over there. I won't show you today. I knit the first one several weeks ago, and then I broke my needle, and I took the needle out of this sock so I could finish the cat socks. Now that I finished the cat socks, I could have put the needle back into this sock, but in the meantime, a very generous viewer sent me another needle, a 2.75 millimeter needle, which is made of metal, so I won't be able to break it as easily. Thank you very much for that. And so I put the needle in. I think it's quite interesting that it's orange and it kind of goes with the colors in this sock. I really like that. It's quite long, so it's perfect for knitting this sock and for doing magic loop stuff. This is not really magic loop, but you know what I mean. So I've continued knitting on that. Not too much, but a little bit. And I will try and finish that sock at some point. Not a big priority, so might take some time. Okay, that's all the socks I'm working on. I intentionally did not start new socks last week, knowing that the Sockmadness starts. But I did start the mittens I wanted to make from the book Alternate Rebellion. And I knit this new Opal Beauty yarn, and the first mitt has giraffes on it. And they are actually so long that I did not add another pattern. Initially, I was planning to do 2 different patterns on each mittens, but different for the right and the left mitten because of the book. They encourage you to knit different mittens. So this is the giraffe out of that book. A good friend of mine had the idea that I should put beads instead of just having a different stitch for the eye. And I really like the idea, so I have 4 beads on this mitt now, and they're quite long. If the giraffe hadn't been that tall, I probably would have made them a bit shorter, so my little fingers disappears. but that's okay. I really like them. The pattern that I picked for the thumb gusset didn't really work out because the giraffe has rows where there's no orange in there, so I couldn't knit orange into the thumb gusset, so it looks a bit weird and funny, but that's okay. But that's the main reason I didn't knit any pattern in the thumb itself, and then in the end I decided to just knit some rib to match the ribbing up here. Yeah, and that's the first one. And then I decided, I'll show you the inside. Oh no, I'll show you something on the outside. I haven't washed them yet, so they're still quite crumply and not very even. But also you can see here, this is where the two needles I was using, where I switched between the two needles. I was using the Crazy Trio needles by Adi, and for normal socks, I quite like them. So you only have to change needles twice instead of 4 times with double pointed needles. But because they have this bit of cable in between, I sometimes find it difficult to push the stitches along. And also I realized for color work, they're not really very practical, because with double pointed needles, I don't like to carry the floats over where I change needles. But the needles basically have a 90-degree angle, so it's not too bad. But with these needles, because it's just 2 needles, I have to like go from this way into the opposite direction. And I found it really hard to make sure that the floats were okay. And because I tend to do the floats too loose rather than too tight, that's why my stitches at the edge were so loose. So this is what the mitten looks like from the inside. Otherwise I'm really happy with my floats. As I said, it's just where I changed needles, I wasn't too happy with it, but I think it's quite okay. But because it was difficult with these needles, I decided to use different needles. Now the normal sock needles, the double points, and especially the double pointed needles, I wanted to keep free for the Sockmadness. But I had also decided that for the Sockmadness, I was definitely not going to use the short, I think 9-inch circular needles, because I'm not very fast on them, and also they strain my hands. So if I knit on these small circular needles for a longer time, my hands will hurt more than they usually do. So I thought I can use the needle for the mitten. So that's what I did. I don't have to knit on them on the mitten for like hours on end, but for doing color work, I really like these needles. So I've done color work socks with these short circular needles, and even though I find it a bit fiddly and I'm still not 100% used to using them, because you don't have to change to a different needle, it's really easy to manage the floats, and I really like that for that. Yeah, but I've only managed to do the cuff so far. Yeah, I've just started the first row with only knit stitches. So as you can see on that one, I did a few rounds of stockinette stitch without pattern before I started the pattern. And I'm not sure if I mentioned it last time, but this mitten will have elephants. So it's like a little safari with giraffes and elephants. That's the plan. So I hope to at least show you a few elephants or half elephants or something next week. But again, not a big priority. No promises what I'll show you next week, except for a pair of Madness socks. So that's all the small projects I'm knitting with sock yarn. Now I'll show you my one new cast on that I did cast on last week. And that's an idea that I basically had last week while I was podcasting, because I was showing the Opal Beauty yarn last week, and in the German episode I showed all the colors there are in that series, and one of the colors is this beautiful blue. And I knew I wanted to make something with it, but I didn't know what yet. But last week I was also wearing my Strider cowl, the Cowl, that's a design by Susan Pandolf out of the Lord of the Rings series. And I said that I've always wanted to knit another one, but I didn't know what yarn or what color to use yet. And then later on I was showing this yarn and I was like, that's the idea. I want to have a Strider cowl in blue. And that's what I did. So I cast on the same cowl that I wore in the podcast last week. So it's that mix of a lace pattern and a cable pattern. And this is half the pattern repeat. So the next half, I think the cables will be here and the lace pattern will be there. So they just switch places and then you repeat the chart. I really enjoy the knit. It's such a long time ago that I knit the first one that I didn't remember the pattern at all. But it's not that complicated, it's not that difficult. And now that I'm knitting something bigger with this yarn, I can feel the, it's supposed to have Edelweiss extract, whatever that means. So Edelweiss is this flower, whatever that's called in English. And so they got something out of that flower, put it into the yarn, and also some vitamin E, and that's supposed to be good for your hands, for your skin. And it really does feel very nice while I'm knitting, now that I can hold more of the yarn than with the mittens. And I'm really looking forward to wearing this around my neck. I'm sure there's going to be a really nice feeling. And yeah, so that's the Strider cowl. Really enjoying that. Okay, then on to the bigger projects. And I'll start with the shawl. So I can only show you one shawl that I'm working on, as the other one was suddenly finished, suddenly done. I was so surprised. And that's the test knit that I'm doing. And I have to apologize to the designer because her name is Sarah. In the last 2 episodes, I called her Jenny. I'm really sorry about that. So the designer of this beautiful shawl is called Sarah, and she's Sarah Knit on Instagram, but I think it's spelled sarah.k.nit. So altogether it's knit, but yeah, it's quite funny. And she designed this morning dew shawl, and I'm test knitting it for her. I have added a few more pattern repeats. Each repeat is taking quite a bit of time now as the rows are getting longer. Yeah, I weighed my yarn this morning and I have used about 40 grams of each of the balls. They used to be 100 grams, so I haven't even used half of it yet, but it's growing. So this side up here is supposed to be 150 centimeters when I start the last pattern repeat. That is a bit different from the way all the other pattern repeats are knit, so I have to finish the shawl to test the whole pattern. I'm not quite sure how to measure this, because if I put it down it's fairly short, but if I pull on it, and I am going to block this in the end, it's a lot longer. So I'm not quite sure how to measure it yet. I don't want to pull it too far apart and then have a shawl that's not that big. I think if I still have time in the testing phase, I will keep knitting on it to have it nice and big. And yeah, very much enjoying knitting on this. It's yeah, now that I know the pattern by heart, and the bit that's garter stitch just grows and grows. There's for every bit of pattern I knit, there's a lot of mindless knitting to do. So it's a perfect TV knitting piece at the moment. Another project that I knit in front of the TV a lot is my mohair pullover that I'm knitting from the book Geek Knits, the verse pullover. And yeah, I have reached an important point in that project insofar as that the yoke is finished. I was holding 2 yarns double. One is a silk hair yarn by Lana Grossa, and the other is Silk Hair something, Silk Hair Glitter or something. So one of them has a bit of glitter in it, the other doesn't. And I wasn't quite sure what to do if I had some of the glitter yarn left before I split for the arms and fronts and back. So I wasn't quite sure where to put the glitter into the arms or the front and back and what to do. But I don't have to think about that anymore because I finished the yoke and I finished this ball of yarn. So this is all I have left from the 25 grams that were in that ball. And I thought that this wasn't a full ball of yarn when I started knitting it, but it must have been, either it must have been quite complete or it has more yardage than the glitter yarn. I'm not quite sure about that. I haven't checked that, but I still have a little bit left of this. So now I am going to split for the arms and front and back, and most patterns have you knit the front and back first and then do the sleeves later. And what I usually do is I do a bit of the front and back until the yarn I'm working with is done, and then I'll do the sleeves. If I did that with this ball of yarn and just used both ends of it, I'd probably only get a few rows out of it. I'm not quite sure whether that's worth doing. But if I add a new ball of yarn, then I have that hanging around. And also with this pattern, they actually start with the sleeves. They also knit the sleeves straight and not in the round, which I won't be doing. I will knit them in the round. But what I'm going to do is actually knit the sleeve, add a new ball of yarn, and then I have to decide how much of the arm I'm going to knit with just this color, and then I want to add another yarn that I have that is left over from a shawl that I knit for my sister's silver wedding anniversary celebration. And so there's quite a few decisions to be made at this point, so at some point I'll have to sit down, start the sleeve, and then see make a decision as to when to put the other color in. Yeah, but that's that. I'm really happy to have that bit finished. I'm really happy that this glitter yarn was enough for the whole yoke. And I tried it on yesterday. It looks good. And we shall see how this progresses. Okay, then we're at the point where I show you my blankets. I will show you two of the blankets I'm working on. I haven't knit. There's a crochet blanket I'm doing with green opal yarn that I haven't worked on in ages, so I'll pick that up at some point. I haven't done anything on my memories blanket in a while, even though I would really like to get that going again so I can put the leftover yarns of the projects I'm knitting on at the moment. I would like to put them into the blanket as soon as I finish my projects, but right now it's difficult. But it's still there, it's still lying there, it's looking at me and talking to me, so I will do that at some point. But I have been working on the dinosaur blanket, which is really important and one of my priorities at the moment. And I have done several of the dinosaur heads, but nothing else. But I have done 3 of them, so I'm quite happy with that. As you can see, I've used different colors for all the faces. This is what it's going to look like when the face is done. So these were the ones that I showed you last week, and these are the 3 that I did this week. So as you can see, they still need this bit, which is the main color. It's 4 rounds of main color that still have to go around these, but I did the face, I did the bubbles, and I did the background color. And so this week I'm going to concentrate on crocheting the mouth or the beak, the horns and the eyes, make sure that I put everything on them. And once I've done that, I will have finished half the dinosaurs I need. Maybe I'll take a bit of a break, do the background color around these, and maybe crochet 1 or 2 of the just background color pieces that I need for the blanket. I need 10 squares and I think 12 triangles. So far I have 1 square and 2 triangles, so maybe I'll just work on these a little bit. But the priority this week is going to be to finish the faces on these pieces. Yeah, so that's the dinosaurs growing. And then my last project, as usual, is our current knit along. We are knitting the Optic blanket. It's a free pattern on Ravelry. There's a discussion thread on the Ravelry group that we have for my YouTube channel. You find it under Kikos Strickschule. And if you want to join in, this is going to be a year-long knit along, because I have decided to knit 1 square on that blanket every week. And that takes me to almost the end of the year. I'll still have a bit of time to sew the pieces that I'm knitting together, so that the blanket can be finished by the end of the year. Basically, the blanket can be knit in one piece because you start all the squares from the outside, you knit it towards the middle, and then you just pick up stitches from the existing square. And then, so this is the square that I knit last week. And so this week when I knit my square, I can cast on a few stitches and then I can pick up the stitches here and I can knit the next square to the existing squares. The reason I will have to sew a few pieces is that I realize that the more pieces you have together, the harder it gets to push your knitting around while you knit in the round. And so I decided to do pieces with 9 squares, so 3 by 3 squares, and then I'll put it down. I'll start the next square and I'll do 6 of these, and then I can knit them together so that I have 2 of those squares next to each other and then 3 on top of each other. So that's the plan. That's the Optic blanket. If you still want to join in, you're very welcome. If there's interest, I can open up an English-speaking discussion thread in the group. So far, nobody has asked me to do that. Maybe I should do it anyway to make it easier for you to join in the discussion. I keep forgetting to do that, to be honest, but maybe I'll remember at some point and then I'll do that. Yeah, but that was everything I knit and crocheted last week. I hope you enjoyed watching my projects grow, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!